Hello and welcome to Herstory episode 15, the Anne Boleyn edition. This is my fourth time of trying to record this. People keep phoning me, so I've put my phone on flight mode. There was a fly buzzing around and annoying me. I don't think this video is meant to be, but I'm gonna give it a go. So I'm wearing my special Anne Boleyn necklace. Just to give you a little hint, tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be the famous Anne Boleyn necklace that she is wearing in like every picture of her. My mama makes amazing jewelry, and she made this for me, and I never get a chance to wear it because when would you really? But now I do, so yay. Sorry this episode is a little bit late in getting to you. I've had the most lovely couple of weeks. My family have been up, my best friend's been up, with her husband and my goddaughter. My mum and stepdad and sister have been here. My dad, stepmom and brother have been here. It's been lovely. Been a crazy time. So I'm only just getting around to recording Anne Boleyn. So over on my Facebook group, the Herstory Girls, if you are not a fan, go over already and give it a like. We had a poll, and the poll was between Anne Boleyn and Catherine the Great this week, and there were 11 votes, and Anne Boleyn won by 1 vote. So your vote does actually really count. So because I'm a little bit late in doing last week's Herstory, I thought I would do Anne Boleyn for you today, and then you can have Catherine the Great on Friday, like normal. Because I am a benevolent goddess. Anyway, you all know me. You know I could talk about Anne Boleyn until the cows come home because I'm a Tudor historian, so I'm going to launch in and try and get this over and done with as soon as possible without any flies or phone calls or any other such interruptions. Dogs barking and whatnot. So, Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife, famous for having her head lopped off, ultimately a 21st century woman in a 16th century world. Too ambitious and too outspoken for her own good, and that became her downfall. Born between 1501 and 1507, we are not entirely sure. Sources differ. We think more towards the 1501 side of it. She's born at Blickling Estate, which is a beautiful Tudor property in Norfolk in England, which is about an hour and 10 minutes north of where I live, and it is gorgeous. I interviewed for a job there, didn't get it, got the job at Ickworth instead. But it's beautiful. It's like a little mini Hampton Court. It's absolutely gorgeous. Anyway, she's the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, the first Earl of Wiltshire, the Earl of Ormond, and the second Duke of Norfolk. And her mum is Lady Elizabeth Howard. I nearly said Catherine Howard. We'll get on to her later. His wife is Lady Elizabeth Howard. She grew up at Hever Castle with older sister Mary and brother George. We're not entirely sure, because we're not sure when Anne was born. We don't know if George is older brother or younger brother, but we think younger brother. At the time of her birth, the Boleyn and Howard families were some of the most respected in English aristocracy, and her dad Thomas was a friend of Henry VII. In 1513, Anne was invited to join Margaret of Austria in her household, where she received her education, and she learned arithmetic, genealogy, grammar, history, reading, writing, dancing, embroidery, music, singing, card games, archery, falconry, horseback riding, and hunting. Her sister Mary is about to marry Louis XII of France in October 1514. So Anne goes to be her maid of honour at the wedding and to go and live in her household. It's in the French court that Anne learns art, fashion, French language, literature, music, poetry, philosophy, French culture, dance, etiquette, and she became an expert at flirtation and courtly love. Anne was of average height, slender, with long, straight, thick black or very dark brown hair, dark brown eyes, a strong nose, wide mouth with slim lips and an olive complexion. So she looked very exotic for a British person. She was brilliant, charming, charismatic, driven, elegant, forthright, keen-witted, lively, opinionated, and passionate. She also had a sharp tongue and a terrible temper. And as we know, Anne is a Protestant, which is going to feature later as well. So Anne's called back to England by her father in 1522 to marry her Irish cousin James Butler in an attempt to settle a dispute over the earldom of Ormond. Whilst this is being negotiated, Mary has been recalled from France for having affairs, and the marriage is no more. She marries a man called William Carey, a minor noble, in February 1520. Henry VIII attends the wedding, and soon after that, Mary becomes Henry VIII's mistress. They may or may not have had a child together called Henry Carey. Also possibly had a daughter together who I believe was called Catherine Carey, but don't quote me on that. Anne made her debut at court in March 1522 at the Chateau Vert pageant, playing Perseverance in a play, where her and Mary took part in an elaborate dance, and she made quite the impression, and men were smitten with her. We have to remember that because she'd been in France, she was very exotic looking. And she was dark. She was very, very dark for an English woman. So she must have seemed like some kind of Matahari in her French ways. And her fashion was very different as well. So I've got two contrasting pictures here to show you. So Henry VIII's mother, Elizabeth of York, wears this kind of headdress. All right. And then you have Catherine of Aragon, who wears this kind of headdress. And then Anne Boleyn comes over, and she's wearing what's called the French hood. She's very different. She's like, she's a trendsetter, basically. She's a beautiful, exotic-looking trendsetter. Anne was soon courted by a guy called Henry Percy, and they entered into a secret betrothal, but that was very quickly broken off by both sets of parents as soon as they found out. Anne then enters into the service of Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife. In 1526, Henry VIII becomes enamoured with Anne and began his pursuit of her. Anne, however, had seen what had happened with her sister, how she'd been kind of used and had an illegitimate child with him, and then kind of been cast aside. And she said if he wanted the goods, then she wanted to be queen. Now, I think it's quite important to remember at this point that Henry VIII's last 5 wives came in very quick succession, like bam, 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 bam. Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was a very long one. I want to say 17 years, nearly 20 odd years. They married very young. They had a very happy marriage. Henry was quite the gorgeous young man. She was quite the gorgeous young lady, and they had a genuine love and affection for one another. And they were married for a very long time, and it was only when Catherine sort of reached an age where realistically she wasn't going to have any more children, enter Anne Boleyn, and Henry starts to get ideas about divorce. So I think it's quite important to remember that Catherine and Henry were married for a very long time, and that she was much loved by the public and the court and everyone. Right, now I'm hydrated. So yeah, enter Anne Boleyn, and so begins the biggest scandal the Catholic Church had ever seen. More of that in Catherine of Aragon's episode, which we will no doubt do. Essentially, the Catholic Church didn't believe in divorce. So ultimately, this happens over 7 years. Henry keeps going to the Pope and he keeps asking for a divorce. The problem is the Pope is a prisoner of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, who's Catherine of Aragon's nephew. So Cardinal Wolsey, the poor guy who's in charge of trying to negotiate this divorce for Henry, keeps going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And for 7 years, they try and negotiate this divorce. And all the while, Anne is dangling Henry from a string, going, not sleeping with you, not doing it yet. Nope, told you I want to be queen. essentially what ends up happening is Anne is a Protestant, and she starts to feed Henry Protestant literature and pamphlets that advocate church reformation. And ultimately what ends up happening is Henry decides to break with the Catholic Church and set up his own Church of England with him as the head of it. And with him as the head of it, he can do what he likes. So he can divorce Catherine of Aragon in order to marry Anne. And this is what we call the Reformation. It's very complicated. I've just tried to put it in a nutshell. So all the while this was going on, Anne sent him very saucy love letters and kept him on a hook. There's a great documentary by Suzannah Lipscomb on I think it's Henry and Anne, the Lovers That Changed History, something like that. And it's a dramatised version of the love letters between them, and it's very sweet. But no sexy business, no. In 1528, Anne went down with a sweating sickness, which is one of those mystery illnesses that we don't really know what it was. We think it was a type of influenza, but it was pretty deadly back then. She's taken to Hever Castle. Henry sends his own personal physician to go and tend to her. And this near-death experience of the woman he loves caused Henry to become completely absorbed in securing an annulment from Catherine of Aragon, and that kind of spurs him to make the final push. Cardinal Wolsey, the man behind getting the divorce, was axed from his job, and he would have literally been axed, but he died on the way to the scaffold. Bless his little cotton socks. Catherine of Aragon is banished from court in 1531, and her rooms are given over to Anne. Ouch. In 1532, the Boleyn family chaplain Thomas Cranmer becomes Archbishop of Canterbury. And friend of the Boleyn family, Thomas Cromwell, becomes Henry's chancellor. So Henry is completely surrounded by Boleyns at this point. So they finalised the break with Rome. Anne's a very active part in the ruling of the country. She negotiated with foreign diplomats. She solidified an alliance with France. Henry and Anne were married in a secret ceremony on the 14th of November, 1532. She very quickly became pregnant, so an official service was conducted on the 25th of January, 1533. Anne was crowned Queen Consort on the 1st of June, 1533 at Westminster Abbey, to a mixed response from the public. As I say, Catherine of Aragon had been queen for a very long time, so they weren't very happy about her being set aside in favour of Anne. Anne gives birth to her daughter Elizabeth slightly prematurely on the 7th of September 1533. Henry is not happy about this at all. In fact, he is apoplectic. He wants a boy, which is highly ironic considering Elizabeth will go on to be the greatest monarch Britain has ever seen. Ever. That's not just my opinion, that's a fact. Don't come for me on that one. Sorry. I'm not very good at being confrontational, but true. Best ever. The marriage between them was very passionate and very tumultuous. So Anne was outspoken, sharp, and intelligent, and the two of them would kind of erupt like a volcano and argue like crazy, and then they'd make up really passionately. And it was very, very up and down. And Anne was not afraid to say what she thought. Anne continues to suffer miscarriages and stillbirths, and as she fails to produce a son and an heir, public opinion turns further against the king's whore. On the 8th of January 1536, Catherine of Aragon dies. Anne was pregnant again, and she knew with Catherine dead her position was precarious because Henry could marry again. The fly's back. We're going to ignore it. I'm not filming this 5th time. Henry could marry again without any scandal of illegality, because basically what he could turn around and say was his marriage to Catherine of Aragon was legitimate, so the divorce technically wasn't allowed under the Catholic Church, so the marriage to Anne was not legitimate, so he could annul that marriage and marry someone else with Catherine dead. So she knows her position's precarious, and she knows this baby has to be a boy, right? Enter Jane Seymour. Perfect timing. Anne's second cousin, and she will, of course, have an episode to herself. Later in January, Henry was unhorsed in a jousting tournament and knocked unconscious for 2 hours, the stress of which led to Anne miscarrying a male baby. And this happened on the day Catherine of Aragon was buried at Peterborough Abbey. Not good. Suzannah Lipscomb has an absolutely brilliant book called 1536, The Year That Changed Henry VIII. And it is absolutely brilliant. Basically, Susie's theory is that during this jousting tournament, Henry sustains a head injury, which affects and alters his personality so that he becomes the tyrant that we associate him with later in life. Because up until this point, he's been a very bonny prince. He's been sporty, he's been active, he's been loving, caring, generous, kind, and then he seems to just change overnight. And that is all detailed in this book, and I think it's a really solid theory, and it's well worth a read. Anyway, so as Anne is recovering from her miscarriage, Henry declared that he'd been seduced into the marriage with her by sorcery. Jane was moved in to the royal apartments, and former ally Thomas Cromwell began to engineer Anne's downfall. Nice. Who needs friends? You can have frenemies, right? He decides to advance Jane's cause. Towards the end of April, Anne's musician, Mark Smeaton, who by all accounts was very dishy, was arrested as Anne's lover. He later confessed under torture to being Anne's lover, but by all accounts he was actually gay. So there you go. Also arrested were Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton, and Sir Thomas Wyatt. Sir Richard Page, and even Anne's own brother George was arrested on charges of incest and treason. Henry really wanted her gone. On May the 2nd, 1536, Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. On the 15th of May, Anne and George were tried separately of adultery, incest, and high treason. When the guilty verdict was announced, Anne collapsed and had to be carried from the courtroom. Thomas Cranmer declared Anne and Henry's marriage null and void. Both Anne and George were sentenced to death. George and the other accused men were executed on the 17th of May. Henry did show some compassion to Anne in her final days. He commuted her sentence from burning to beheading, and he hired an experienced swordsman from France to be the executioner over the common axe, which could take several blows to sever a head. Shortly before dawn on Friday the 19th of March 1536, Anne attended Mass. She had her last rites and swore upon the Holy Sacraments that she had never been unfaithful to the King. She then was taken to a special scaffold built inside the Tower of London's walls. She wore a red petticoat under a loose dark grey gown of damask trimmed in fur and a mantle of ermine. Accompanied by 2 female attendants, she made the walk from Queen's House to the scaffold and showed a devilish spirit. She gave a short speech praising the King and begging for the Lord's mercy. She did not confess guilt and actually subtly implied her innocence by speaking of those who had meddled in my cause. Spectators cried. Her speech was so moving, apparently. Her mantle was removed. Anne lifted off her headdress and tucked her hair away. She said goodbye to her weeping ladies, knelt upright in the French execution style, had her blindfold tied, and prayed continuously under her breath as her head was removed in a single stroke. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula inside the grounds of the Tower of London, where she remains to this day. So there we go. That is the very short kind of life of Anne Boleyn. If she was born in 1501, and died in 1536, that would have made her 35 at the oldest. If she was born in 1507, then should have been 7 years younger. Fun facts about Anne Boleyn. There's a weird rumour, for some reason, that Anne Boleyn had 6 fingers, probably to do with the fact that Henry said that he'd been seduced by her and she was a sorceress and all this business, because there's a rumour that she had 6 fingers on her right hand. Physical deformities then were interpreted as a sign of evil, and so she would never have secured the king's affection in the first place with 6 fingers on her right hand. So that's a blatant lie. Upon exhumation in 1876, she was described as having finely formed tapering fingers with no abnormalities. So there we go. As I say, her daughter Elizabeth went on to become the best monarch ever. So, bad judgment call, Henry. Anne Boleyn was descended from St. Thomas of Becket, who we heard about during Henry II and Anne of Aquitaine and Matilda. There are no contemporary portraits of Anne surviving. It's crazy, isn't it? Because there's so many portraits of her, but none of them are contemporary. A bust of her was cast on a commemorative medallion in 1534, which was struck to celebrate her 2nd pregnancy. But that's the only contemporary image we have of her. She has been called the most influential and important queen consort England has ever had. Make of that what you will. Anne's Book of Hours shows she was a woman of faith, but there are also drawings in there of things like astrolabes, which show she was a Renaissance woman, exposed to new ideas and thoughts. Anne's ghost is supposed to haunt the Tower of London, Blickling Estate, Hever Castle, Marwell Hall, and Sal Church. Anne had 4 children: Elizabeth in 1533, 2 miscarried sons in 1534 and 1535, and a stillborn son, January 1536. The poem "O Death, Rock Me Asleep" is generally believed to have been authored by Anne in the Tower. Her portrait can be seen on the stairs at Hogwarts in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which is a canny little reference to her being a witch and a sorceress. I like that. So, to find out more, read this enormous stack of books that I have. As I say, 1536, the year that changed Henry VIII by Suzannah Lipscomb. Really, really fascinating read. The Lady in the Tower, The Fall of Anne Boleyn by Alison Weir, is also an amazing book. To get a bit of background on the whole Tudor court life and Catherine of Aragon and everything that happened before, you have The 6 Wives of Henry VIII by Antonia Fraser and exactly the same title by Alison Weir. Both really, really good books. You also have The Other Boleyn Girl, which is a fictional story by Philippa Gregory. You have Wolf Hall. You have Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. And oh god, there's so much. There's so many books. If you're not much of a reader and you're more of a watcher, you can watch the adaptations made of Wolf Hall and The Other Boleyn Girl. There's a film of that. Please give the TV series The Tudors a watch. It's absolutely brilliant. Natalie Dormer does an amazing job as Anne Boleyn, and can't remember his flipping name, but the guy that plays Henry VIII does an incredible job as well. Jonathan Rhys-Meyers does an incredible job of playing Henry VIII as well, and captures what he's like when he's younger, before he becomes tyrannical very well. And it's quite historically accurate as well. I was very impressed by that. Please watch Suzannah Lipscomb's documentary on Anne and Henry's love letters called Henry and Anne, the Lovers Who Changed History. The Last Days of Anne Boleyn, 6 Wives with Lucy Worsley, and there's another version of 6 Wives with David Starkey, though obviously I'm going to prefer Lucy Worsley's version. And you've got Anne of 1,000 Days as well. So there's plenty to be going out there. So ultimately, my closing note, and this has been the longest episode yet, longer than Elizabeth actually, which is quite surprising. Anne was a beautiful, enchanting, smart, witty, and quick-tempered woman. She paid for her strong ambition and her opinions with her life. She set trends and divided opinions. She went from Marquess of Pembroke, the highest title attainable, most trusted and influential advisor, to being cast aside as an adulterer and executed for treason. And that's the story of Anne Boleyn. Please drop a comment below with who you'd like to see in future episodes of Herstory. Let me know what you think of Anne Boleyn. Do you think Anne Boleyn's overrated, or do you think Anne Boleyn was an incredible woman who ultimately refused to sacrifice her personality and suffered her downfall as a result? Let me know what you think. And I'm going to go and film Catherine the Great. So I will upload this for you now, and I will see you all on Friday with Catherine the Great. Mwah! Don't forget to like, subscribe, all that good stuff.